He stopped the car a few meters from the shoulder, turned off the engine, and stood there, his hands on the steering wheel, looking ahead as if waiting for something that wasn't coming. The dog was still inside, too quiet, breathing softly, not barking, not moving. The man opened the door, got out without looking back, and slammed it shut harder than necessary. It wasn't haste, it wasn't anger. It was a decision. The road was empty, the air still, and for a few seconds everything was strangely silent, as if even the world were watching that choice. The man's name was Daniel. He had worked as a highway patrol officer for years, accustomed to seeing accidents, hasty farewells, and impulsive decisions. In recent months, however, fatigue had changed the way he drove, spoke, and even breathed. Since becoming the temporary guardian of a child in the family, the house seemed smaller, noisier, heavier. The dog, a German shepherd trained as a canine police dog, silently observed everything, attentive to every change in routine, as if sniffing out something beyond what the eyes could see. If this story has already started to tug at your heartstrings, like the video, turn on notifications and subscribe to the channel. Stories like this don't require haste, they require presence. That morning, Daniel took the child in the back seat, silent, hugging a backpack bigger than her own body. The dog followed in the adapted trunk, upright posture, fixed gaze, loyalty almost visible. It was too common a scene to attract attention. Still, there was something out of place in the way the dog breathed, too slowly, as if counting the time. Nothing happened during the drive. No barking, no sudden movements, no heroic reactions. Only the sound of tires on the asphalt and the faint metallic smell that wafted from the road after the previous night's rain. The child stared out the window, lost, while Daniel wondered if he was doing the right thing by continuing on like that. The dog, for its part, subtly shifted its body position, brought its snout close to the fence, and kept its eyes fixed on the rearview mirror, as if trying to warn of something that no one had yet noticed. The first return happened in the late afternoon. Daniel parked the car in front of the house, turned off the engine, and only then noticed the empty space behind it. The dog wasn't there. The gate was closed, the yard untouched, no marks on the ground. The child asked the dog's name for the first time in days, and he didn't answer. Minutes later, looking out the window, he saw the familiar silhouette standing on the other side of the street, exactly where he had left the car that morning. The German shepherd remained motionless, looking at the road, as if waiting for something that hadn't yet happened. The next day, it happened again. Daniel tried to ignore it, attributing it to the broken routine, to accumulated stress. But the puppy returned to the same spot, at the same time, sat down firmly and stayed there for long minutes. It didn't bark. It didn't advance. It just watched. People passed by, cars drove on, the world went on, but the dog remained. The child began to notice too, clutching his backpack to his chest whenever he saw it standing there. Daniel felt an unease difficult to explain, as if that simple scene was saying more than it seemed. As the days passed, the repetition ceased to be a coincidence. The dog would disappear after dawn and reappear on the same stretch of road, always alone, always silent. Daniel tried to restrain him, change the route, leave earlier. Nothing worked. The German shepherd always found a way back. There was something different in his gaze, a fixed, almost tense attention that contrasted with his calm behavior at home. The air in that stretch seemed heavier, as if the road held a secret that no one was yet willing to face. One morning, Daniel decided to observe from a distance. He stayed inside the car, engine off, windows closed. The dog arrived, sat down, and tilted its head slightly, sniffing the wind. A truck passed by too fast, raising dust, and the dog didn't move. It just watched. The silence was so intense that the sound of Daniel's own breathing seemed too loud. He thought about calling the dog, but something stopped him. Maybe it was intuition. Maybe it was fear of hearing an answer he didn't want. The child began to ask fewer questions and observe more. Whenever they passed the place, her eyes searched for the dog even before the road appeared. There was a moment when she reached out her hand, pointing to the empty shoulder, as if expecting something to appear there. Daniel felt a tightness in his chest, a mixture of protectiveness and doubt. The dog, that day, took longer to leave. He stood up, took 2 steps forward, and stopped again, undecided, as if waiting for permission that never came. That night, Daniel had trouble sleeping. The silence in the house seemed different, more alert. The dog rested on the floor but didn't fully relax. Every distant noise made his ears twitch. There was no aggression, only vigilance. Outside, the road remained dark and empty, as always, yet something there seemed to call to the dog, day after day, with an insistence that began to erode Daniel's confidence in his own choices. The following morning, Daniel decided to walk the dog to the side of the road, but kept his distance. He watched as the German Shepherd walked with measured steps, its body aligned, as if following an invisible mark on the ground. Upon reaching the exact spot, the dog stopped, sat down, and kept its muzzle down for a few seconds. There was nothing there, no object, no sound. Yet the dog seemed attentive to something that wasn't visible. Daniel felt a discreet shiver run up his arms and wondered for the first time if he was interpreting everything wrong. As the hours passed, the dog didn't move. People approached, some asking if the animal was lost. Daniel replied that no, the dog had a home, a family. Even so, the German Shepherd remained there, ignoring calls, refusing water offered by strangers. The child watched from afar, pressing his fingers together as if afraid to break the silence. Time seemed suspended on that stretch of road, and no one knew why. The behavior began to generate comments. A neighbor suggested the puppy might be sick. Another said that animals sense things humans don't. Daniel listened to everything without responding. That night, when he picked up the dog, he noticed a different smell in its fur, something metallic mixed with road dust. The puppy lay down, exhausted, but kept its eyes open for long minutes. Daniel ran his hand over its head, feeling a strange weight in his chest, as if he were failing to protect something he didn't yet understand. In the room, the child woke up startled, saying he had dreamed of lights on the road and voices calling softly. Daniel tried to reassure him, saying it was just his imagination. The dog immediately raised his head, alert, as if recognizing those words. There was no barking, only silence and controlled breathing. Daniel realized that this invisible connection between the dog and the child was growing stronger, and it was making him uneasy, perhaps dangerous. On the 5th day, the puppy arrived at the spot earlier than usual. The sky was still cloudy, and there was almost no traffic on the road. Daniel felt a strange urgency, as if something was about to happen. The dog walked a few meters beyond its usual spot, stopped, took 2 steps back, and sat down again. That slight hesitation made Daniel's heart race. It was like watching someone about to make a wrong decision and not being able to interfere. By the end of the week, Daniel realized he couldn't think of anything else. The dog wasn't making mistakes. At least, it didn't seem so. There was too much consistency, too much precision, too much silence. Still, trusting would mean admitting that something was out of control. On that stretch of road, the dog remained steadfast, protecting something invisible, while Daniel struggled between moving forward or turning back, and that choice began to weigh more heavily each day. Daniel began to be questioned more often than he would have liked. Co-workers asked why he was arriving late. A supervisor commented, in a tone that was too neutral, that his obsession with a dog standing on the road didn't seem healthy. Daniel tried to explain, but the words sounded weak even to him. How could he justify something that had no form, name, or concrete proof? The dog kept going, returning to the same spot every day, and this consistency was beginning to seem to others like a stubborn, perhaps dangerous, mistake. At home, the atmosphere changed. The child began refusing to go out in the morning if the dog wasn't nearby. He would sit on the sofa, hugging his knees, his eyes fixed on the door, as if afraid that something would be lost if they went out without him. Daniel tried to impose normalcy, but failed. The German shepherd would slowly circle the room, sniffing the air, stopping near the child's backpack. Nothing explicit, nothing clear. Just a protective presence that seemed to say, "Not yet." Along that stretch of road, people's reactions also changed. Some drivers honked angrily. A local shopkeeper called animal control, claiming there was a risk of an accident. When the patrol car slowly passed, the dog didn't move. It sat calmly, eyes alert, body straight. Daniel felt his heart race. If someone decided to forcibly remove the dog, it would all end before it even began. He thought about taking it away permanently, and that idea made him hesitate. That night, Daniel mentally reviewed every detail, times, distances, minimal changes in the dog's behavior. Nothing made logical sense. The dog showed no physical pain, no fear, no aggression, just silent persistence. Daniel began to wonder if he was projecting something that didn't exist, if the animal's loyalty was being confused with purpose. Still, whenever he thought about ignoring the behavior, something inside him recoiled, as if it knew the consequence would be irreversible. The breaking point came with a choice that was all too simple. An urgent call at work required Daniel to leave early the next day, exactly when the dog usually returned to the road. He looked at the dog, then at the child, then at the clock. There was no time for long deliberations. Trusting the dog meant disobeying human orders. Not trusting it meant leaving something behind, perhaps forever. Daniel tried to solve everything practically. He adjusted schedules, asked for favors, swapped shifts. Nothing seemed enough. There was always a gap when the dog would escape, returning to the same stretch of road as if obeying a call that never failed. That day, Daniel even raised his voice, something rare. The dog stopped, looked at him with absolute calm, and didn't react. There was no challenge, just a patient wait. That silent reaction weighed more than any bark, and Daniel looked away, uncomfortable. At work, the assumptions began. A colleague suggested the dog might be confused by some old routine. Another insinuated that Daniel was letting emotion cloud his judgment. He listened silently, feeling his confidence slowly slipping through his fingers. The canine police dog, trained to protect, to sniff out danger, was now seen as a risk. Daniel began to wonder when he had stopped trusting the instinct that had always guided him, and if that was precisely the mistake he was making now. At home, the child began drawing the road, always the same curve, the same shoulder, the same dog sitting there. No cars, no people, just waiting. Daniel tried to joke, to change the subject, but the drawings repeated themselves. That night, the child asked if the dog was protecting someone. Daniel didn't know how to answer. The dog, lying near the door, raised its head when it heard the question. Its eyes reflected the dim light of the room, too attentive for such a simple moment. The next day, animal control returned, this time with clear orders. Daniel arrived at the location a few minutes early and found the dog already in position. The wind was different, carrying a stronger metallic smell. The dog stood up, took 2 steps, and stopped again, instinctively blocking the passage. Daniel felt his stomach churn. If he insisted on removing it, he would break something he might not be able to fix later, but if he didn't act, he would lose control of the situation. The decision needed to be made too quickly. People were watching, An officer approached cautiously. The dog stood firm, its posture calm, its gaze fixed. Daniel raised his hand, asking for a few minutes. He didn't know what he was defending. He only knew that abandoning that spot now seemed wrong on a level too profound to ignore. The road continued silently, as if holding its breath, waiting for the next human movement. Daniel asked everyone to step back for a few minutes. He didn't give an explanation. He simply stood there beside the dog, watching the road with renewed attention. For the first time, he wasn't observing the dog trying to understand its behavior, but the surrounding environment. The silence seemed different. Not empty, but concentrated. The German shepherd slowly approached the asphalt, stopped before the white line, and looked back at Daniel, as if to confirm that he was seeing it too. It was then that Daniel noticed something he had been ignoring for days. Whenever the dog returned to that spot, the child would become restless hours beforehand, without being able to explain why. It wasn't ordinary fear. It was anticipation, a silent waiting. Daniel felt a knot in his chest as he remembered the drawings, the backpack pressed against the child's body, the way the child avoided looking directly at the road. Perhaps the dog wasn't protecting the place, but someone connected to it. That late afternoon, Daniel decided to do something different. Instead of taking the child straight home, he parked a few meters before their usual spot. The dog got out, walked over to the parking spot, and sat down as always. The child remained in the car, motionless. Daniel noticed that her breathing was too shallow. The dog looked back, then at the road, then back at the car. A simple, repeated, insistent movement, as if connecting pieces that Daniel was still resisting putting together. The wind shifted direction, bringing a stronger smell. Daniel felt his stomach churn. The child put his hand to his chest and said, almost in a whisper, that he didn't like that place. He couldn't say why. The dog immediately stood up and positioned its body between the car and the road. There was no aggression, only protection. Daniel swallowed hard. For the first time, he thought that the danger might not be coming from outside, but was connected to something they were bringing with them. On the way home, Daniel didn't turn on the radio. He didn't say anything. The child slept in the back seat, exhausted. The dog stayed awake the whole time, eyes alert, body tense. Daniel felt a new weight on his shoulders. It was no longer doubt about the dog. It was fear of having understood too late. That night, as he turned off the lights, he knew he could no longer pretend everything was normal, because someone was being protected, even without knowing it. The next morning, Daniel took the child to work with him. He didn't explain why. He just said he needed to keep her close. The dog followed attentively, its posture firm, its eyes constantly alternating between the child and the road. As they approached the stop again, Daniel parked further away than usual. The dog got out of the car, walked a few steps, and stopped abruptly. This time it didn't sit down. It sniffed the air more intensely and backed away slightly, as if something had changed. Daniel felt his heart race. That slight change in behavior meant that something there was no longer the same. Daniel got out of the car and observed the ground with renewed attention. That's when he noticed almost imperceptible marks on the side of the asphalt, as if something heavy had been dragged off the road days before. Nothing flashy, nothing obvious, just signs that someone distracted would never notice. The dog approached slowly and stopped exactly where the marks disappeared into the low grass. It didn't advance. It just stood there firmly, blocking the way. Daniel took a deep breath. This wasn't pointless insistence. It was a boundary. He called for backup on the radio, using vague terms. He didn't want alarm. He didn't want onlookers. While he waited, he returned to the car and found the child awake, her eyes fixed on the same spot on the road. She asked if she needed to get out. Daniel replied no. The dog returned, sat beside the door, and gently touched its snout to the child's leg. A simple gesture, protective. Daniel felt a strong pang in his chest. For the first time, he was certain that the dog was there for her, and not by chance. When his colleagues arrived, Daniel asked them to observe the area without crossing it. One of them commented on the metallic smell, more intense there than in other sections. Another noticed a piece of fabric attached to a low branch, almost invisible. The dog remained motionless, attentive, as if awaiting authorization. Daniel realized that this was no ordinary rescue. There was no theatrical haste. There was care. Every step needed to be correct, because someone had already been exposed too much. At the end of the initial inspection, Daniel made a silent decision. He asked the child to remain in the car, with the doors locked. The dog sat in the front, with its back to the road, watching. It wasn't aggressive blocking. It was guarding. Daniel felt deep regret for every day he tried to keep the dog away from that place. If he had insisted, if he had ignored it, perhaps none of this would be happening now. The road remained quiet. But the secret was beginning to unravel. The officers advanced cautiously, pushing aside the low brush with gloves, attentive to every detail. Daniel remained a few steps behind, watching the dog. The German shepherd didn't move, but its eyes followed every human gesture, as if validating each decision. When one of the officers got too close to the area, the dog took a step forward and stopped. It didn't growl. It didn't bark. It simply occupied the space. The officer instinctively retreated. Daniel realized that the dog wasn't protecting the area. It was protecting the right time to act. Among broken branches and damp earth, something too small to attract attention at first glance emerged. A common object, easily forgotten by anyone in a hurry. A worn child's bracelet with the name almost erased. Daniel felt the air leave his lungs. He immediately looked at the car. The child slept, oblivious, hugging the backpack. The dog turned its face in the same direction. That synchronicity was no coincidence. Daniel remembered when the child arrived at his house days before, without many belongings, without complete explanations. One of the officers commented in a low voice that there were recent records of a suspicious vehicle circulating on that road, always at the same times. Nothing conclusive, nothing that justified raising an alarm beforehand. Daniel felt a new weight settle in his chest. The dog remained still, now sitting, as if the alert phase had shifted to another function. Guardian. The road seemed less empty now, not because something was happening, but because something was finally being seen. Daniel approached the car and slowly opened the door. The child woke up and looked directly at the dog before even speaking. She asked if they could leave yet. Daniel replied that they couldn't. The dog stood up and positioned itself beside her, its body relaxed for the first time in days. That subtle change made Daniel swallow hard. The dog no longer needed to warn. It only needed to stay, as if to say without words that she was safe, at least for now. At that moment, Daniel understood something he hadn't wanted to admit before. The dog hadn't returned to that spot every day out of stubbornness, confusion, or blind loyalty. He was marking a point, a silent warning, a boundary that no one should cross while the child was there. The revelation didn't come as a shock. It came as a slow, steady weight, impossible to ignore. And Daniel knew that what would come next would change everything. Daniel asked everyone to step away from the car for a few minutes. He didn't want questions. He needed to think. He observed the child in the rearview mirror, then the dog, which remained beside her, its body relaxed but alert. For the first time, the dog didn't seem to be on high alert. That meant something. Daniel remembered the child's incomplete history, the gaps in the accounts, the dates that never quite matched up. The dog hadn't identified an imminent danger. It had identified a route and marked a point of constant protection. One of the agents returned with a brief report, spoken too quietly to be casual. There were indications that someone had been following the child's route since before she arrived at Daniel's house. Nothing confirmed, nothing formal, just patterns, repeated times, constant presence. Daniel felt his stomach churn. The dog turned its head slightly, as if recognizing the change in the environment. There was no reaction, just presence. As if to say that now the human needed to act, Daniel realized that each day he tried to keep the dog away from that place. He was closer to breaking the only real barrier that existed. It wasn't force, it wasn't confrontation, it was predictability. The puppy had created a fixed point, a silent warning that this child never went unnoticed. The road wasn't the danger. It was the stage where something was being tested, and the dog had said no every day in the only way he knew how. The radio crackled again. The instruction was now clear. Immediately change the child's routine, alter schedules, routes, visual references. Daniel agreed without hesitation. The dog stood up instantly, as if he had heard the decision even before the words. He approached the car door and sat down, facing Daniel. There was no tension in his gaze. There was trust. Daniel felt his eyes burn, for the first time not from fear, but from silent gratitude. Before leaving, Daniel walked to the exact spot where the dog used to sit. He looked at the empty road, now ordinary again. Nothing there seemed special. Yet that stretch had been guarded for days as if it were sacred. Daniel finally understood that the dog hadn't returned, not because he didn't know how to leave, but because he knew exactly when it wasn't safe to go on. At that moment, Daniel made the simplest and most difficult decision of all. He would never again ignore the dog's silence, because some defenses don't make a sound. They simply remain until the danger gives up trying. The change began the next day. Daniel altered schedules, routes, simple references that had previously seemed irrelevant. Nothing dramatic, nothing visible to an outside observer. The child started leaving earlier, taking different paths without repeating patterns. The dog watched everything with serene attention, as if validating each adjustment. There were no barks, no warning signs, just constant presence. The road was left behind, finally devoid of meaning. Daniel felt, for the first time in weeks, that he was acting before the danger, and not after. At work, Daniel didn't explain the details. He only discreetly asked for support. Procedures were adjusted quietly, records reviewed, routines carefully cross-referenced. Nothing that would draw attention, nothing that would create alarm. The dog started spending more time at home, lying near the door, body relaxed, breathing deeply. The child began to sleep better. The drawings changed. The road disappeared. In its place, houses, trees, and nearby people appeared. Daniel noticed this silently and knew that something had been broken before it became irreversible. One afternoon, Daniel watched the puppy play with the child in the yard. Nothing heroic, nothing symbolic, just a dog and a child sharing the space with trust. Yet that moment carried a deep weight. If the dog hadn't insisted, if he had been ignored once again. Daniel felt a belated regret mixed with relief. The puppy's loyalty hadn't demanded recognition. It only needed to be respected. And now it finally was. A few days later, Daniel drove down the road again. Alone. The spot where the dog used to sit seemed ordinary, almost insignificant. No mark, no sign. The world continued on indifferently. Still, Daniel instinctively slowed down, not out of fear, out of memory. That place had been a warning, a silent boundary. He took a deep breath and continued on, knowing that certain protections leave no trace, only avoided consequences. That night, Daniel sat on the living room floor, leaning against the wall. The dog slowly approached and lay down beside him. There was no long exchange of glances, no symbolic gesture, just shared rest. The child slept peacefully in the room, Daniel closed his eyes for a few seconds, feeling the weight of the last few days finally subside. There was no victory to celebrate, only the certainty that someone had been watching when he almost wasn't, and that had been enough. Daniel never said "thank you" aloud. He didn't need to. He started adjusting small things in his day to spend more time with the dog. He changed the location of the bed, the time of walks, the way he looked at him. The German Shepherd seemed to notice, not as an expectation, but as a quiet acceptance. His loyalty hadn't been an isolated gesture. It was a constant state. Protecting was part of who he was, like breathing. Daniel understood that some forms of love don't ask for anything in return, only maintain trust. At work, a colleague commented that Daniel's routine seemed more stable, more centered. He agreed, without explaining. The child began to smile more, to talk about simple plans, to trust in tomorrow, without realizing why. The dog calmly followed each change. There was no excessive vigilance. There was peace. And Daniel realized that this was the true sign of salvation, when the alert is no longer necessary because the danger has given up trying. One morning, the child asked to take the dog to school. Daniel hesitated for a second, then agreed. The German Shepherd walked beside her with calm steps, without pulling on the leash, just attentive enough. A few curious glances appeared, but nothing more than that. Daniel watched from a distance, feeling something that was neither fear nor pride. It was pure gratitude. That dog had protected without being seen, without being applauded, and now it could simply exist. As the weeks passed, the road ceased to be an issue. There was no longer any reason to return. Daniel realized he didn't miss the complete explanation, the final details. Not everything needs to be fully revealed to fulfill its purpose. The dog never tried to show what it had avoided. It simply moved on when it knew it was safe. Daniel understood that this too was a form of wisdom and a lesson few humans learn in time. The last time Daniel thought about that period, it wasn't with anguish, it was with respect. For the dog, for the child, for himself. He had learned to listen before demanding proof, to trust before losing. The German Shepherd slept peacefully at his feet, breathing slowly, body relaxed. There were no more pending alerts, only the silent peace of one who had fulfilled his mission, without ever needing to explain how. Sometimes danger doesn't announce its arrival. It observes, waits, tests, and when that happens, it's not the noise that protects, it's the consistency. The dog didn't return every day out of stubbornness, nor out of blind attachment. He returned because he recognized a boundary that needed to be maintained. While the world remained distracted, someone stayed alert. And that was enough to save without confrontation, without fanfare, simply by staying. Some heroes don't run, don't attack, don't bark. They sit, they wait, they protect. If this story touched you, leave a comment. Little paw in the comments.